What's poppin', everybody? Today I wanted to make a video on how I color grade my footage in Premiere Pro. So color grading is really important because it can enhance the mood that you're trying to give off in your video. It's also a great way to stand out from other videographers, and it can really just take your video to the next level in general. So with that being said, let's get right into it. Alright, so I opened up Premiere, and the first thing that you want to do is you want to come up here to this color tab and open that up. So when you open up the color tab, the first thing that you see are these lumetri scopes. And these lumetri scopes are going to be super useful when color grading your footage. If you don't see all these graphs and scopes, all you have to do is right click, and the ones we'll be using in this video are the vector scope YUV, the RGB scope, and the waveform luma. What this vector scope does is it shows us which colors are going to be the most saturated in our video. This RGB waveform is going to help us white balance our footage, and this luma waveform is going to make sure that our footage is exposed properly. So let's select our first clip, and then we're going to go up to all these toggles and controls. So the first thing that we want to do is mess with our exposure, and you can see if I move this up and down, our luma waveform over here on the left is going up and down as well, and we want to keep that topping out around 90 or 100. This footage has really bright lights, so it's kind of peaking at some points, but for the most part we want to keep our brightest points right at the top around 90 and 100, and that looks great. As you can see, I lifted up the brighter part of the footage right here, and I made it sit around the 90 mark. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to white balance our footage. You can do that manually with these sliders right here. Or what I like to do is I like to grab this little selector here and then click the whitest thing I can find in my footage. So in this case, it's going to be this RuPaul sign right here. So I'm just going to click that, and bam, now our footage is white balanced. And to check the white balance, we can look over here at this RGB waveform. They're all looking pretty similar. If I move this blue around, you can see the reds raise and whatnot, but I liked it where it was, so I'm going to keep it right there. Now we're going to mess with the contrast, and what the contrast does is it makes your image pop. So it separates the foreground from the background. So I like to increase this to make my image pop a little more, and that looks good. Next, we're going to mess with the highlights, and what the highlights do, it brightens and darkens the brighter portions of the image. Here, it's not really doing much, but we're going to keep those lights bright, and that looks good. And now we're going to play with our shadows. What the shadows do, it brightens and darkens the darker portions of the image. So as you can see over here by like the palm trees, it's getting brighter and darker. I like being able to see those trees. It makes the lights look like they're glowing a little more, so I'm going to keep it a little brighter, and that looks perfect. Next, we're going to mess with the whites, and the whites brighten and darken the brightest parts of the image. I don't think they need much assistance in this case, but I'll brighten them up just a tad. Now we have blacks, and blacks controls the darkest point of your image, so you can brighten or darken the darkest point of your image. I like to bring it down a little to make it pop. And when messing with blacks, you can also look over here at this luma scope, and you want to get it as close to 0 as possible. So we want it sitting right on 0, maybe a little darker in this case, and I like the way that looks a lot, so we'll just stick with that. Now we're going to open up this creative tab, and we're going to play with the saturation. And what the saturation does, it just makes the colors pop more in your picture. But be careful when you're messing with your saturation, because you can definitely overdo it. I like to just raise them up a little bit. But then we can play with the vibrance, and the vibrance does the same thing. It makes your colors pop a little more, but you can play with your vibrance a lot more than you can play with your saturation. So we're going to bring this vibrance up a lot. And that right there is honestly a pretty good color grade for this clip. But if you want to see what you've done, you can press this FX button, and it'll take the effects off, and then click it again and it puts it back on. And I like the way it looks a lot better now. I think it looks a lot more pink and blue rather than yellow and red. So we could leave it at that if we wanted to, but for the purpose of this video, we're going to keep going. So now we're going to come back over to our creative tab, and we're going to mess with our shadow and highlight tint. What shadow tint does is it casts a tint on the darker parts of the image. So in this case, I'm going to make it a little blue, and I already like that a lot better. Now I'm going to come over here to the highlight tints, and this is going to put a tint on the brighter parts of the image. And in this case, I'm going to go with pink, and boom, you can see those pinks just pop out a lot more when we do that. And you can mess around with the tint balance down here, but I liked it where it was, so I'm going to press Command Z. And if you click on something that you don't like in the highlight or shadow tint, if you just double click in the center of the wheel, it'll reset that. But I like those pinks, so I'm going to put it back. My light just died, but let's keep going. So the last thing I like to do is I like to play with the vignette. A lot of people don't mess with the vignette, but I like to. I just think it makes your footage pop a little more. So I like to bring the vignette down, and as you can see, it brightens and darkens the corners of our image. I'm going to bring it down in this case to really put the focus on all these lights in here. And again, I'm going to come up to this FX button and click it just to see what we started with and what we ended with. And wow, I like the end result a lot better. It's a lot more pink and a lot more cinematic and not as dull and orangey, reddy, ugly. So I'm really happy with this. Now let's do one more clip really quick. So the first thing I'm going to do is make sure my clip is selected. Then I'm going to open up the Lumetri scopes. And then I'm going to come over here to our controls and toggles. And I'm going to bump up the exposure. And that's looking good. Now I'm going to take this little dropper and click it on his shirt to white balance it. And then I'm just going to mess with it a little bit manually because I want it to look a little different. But I like the way that looks. And now I'm going to mess with the contrast. I'm going to bring the highlights up so this sparkles a little more. I'm going to bring the shadows up. I'm going to bring the blacks down just a tiny bit. And I'm going to bring the whites up just a bit. And then I'm going to come down here to creative, and I'm going to bump up my saturation, and I'm going to bump up my vibrance, and then I'm going to go down to vignette, and I'm going to turn it down a little bit, and then I'm going to come back up to creative and play around with my shadow tint. I like my shadow tint blue usually. And for my highlight tint, I'm going to go with like a purpley pink because that's just the color scheme of this music video. But I'm liking the way that looks a lot. And so I think I'm going to keep it like that. So that's a quick little way to color grade in Premiere Pro. There's tons of ways to color grade out there. That's just how I color grade in Premiere. If you want me to make a more in-depth video on color grading, or if you have any video requests, please drop a comment. If you got any value out of this video, please give it a thumbs up. And the best way you can support me right now is by clicking that subscribe button. I plan on uploading weekly, so please stay tuned for more tutorials. But for now, I will catch y'all in the next video.